What could be some of the aspects of a marriage that you observed growing up that might not necessarily be healthy that could be carried into your current relationship or marriage now? Okay, let's discuss that today. The first aspect of a not so healthy marriage that we see are the fights, the arguments. And many of you growing up saw mom and dad fighting a lot. Maybe all the time, you might think. There were arguments, there were fights, there were disagreements, and maybe you might have even been put in the middle, where one parent gets angry and the other parent decides they're going to take you and they're going to leave, and then they're going to come back hours later, and maybe one parent takes you and they leave and they come back and they do this, and they're basically, you're in the middle between the argument. And when we see these fights growing up, we don't realize how it can impact us later on down the road. We just know that we're a kid and we're in the middle of it and our parents are fighting. And so these fights really are interesting too, because I think that sometimes when we saw that growing up, we either do one of two things, right? We avoid confrontation at all cost in fear that there could be a fight. And so instead of speaking up for what you feel like, right, you stay quiet. Maybe you just don't say anything because you just don't want to have that argument, because you're so avoidant of wanting to have that argument because you were around it for so long. Okay, so that's the extreme. The other extreme could be that fighting and disagreement and arguments is a daily thing for you because that's just what you're used to. That's how you deal with it. You scream, you yell, maybe the silent treatment, slam the doors, do whatever, because guess what? You saw that when you were growing up. And I think that this is a very interesting impact of how, various concepts of the marriage that we saw unravel or unfold or just be acted in front of us as we were growing up. This is how it impacted us. And so I find that the fighting and the arguments are very interesting. And then some of you try to be aware of that. I don't want to fight like my parents. I also don't want to shut down. And so it's trying to find that middle ground of how do we communicate? How do we express ourselves? How do we have, a conversation without complete full-on confrontation? And that can be really challenging. But again, in order to really have a solid marriage, we've got to figure out that middle ground. The second concept could be dishonesty and cheating. And maybe as you were growing up, maybe mom or dad had stepped out of the marriage. Maybe there was some dishonesty. And so there was this constant battle of, if the other person could trust them and this sort of thing. And one person might not have been always emotionally there, but you didn't understand it growing up. And as time goes by, you probably started realizing what was happening, but it wasn't for a while, especially when you were young. And so sometimes that can be the out for many people in their current marriage. Maybe they need to step out of the marriage to get something that they're not getting in the current marriage. Maybe there's an insecurity of why they're stepping out. Maybe there's a dishonesty piece. And sometimes this can be something that we've learned and we've watched over and over again as we were growing up. And I also find it interesting too is that, when we were children, we really didn't know the impact of any of this. And we had no marriage to associate with. It's not like we saw our mom and dad in their marriage and then we saw all these other marriages and we were able to say, oh, okay, this is a solid marriage, or this needs to be this, or they need to work on this, or these people need to separate. We didn't have any of that to go by. This is the only representation of a relationship like this that we had. And so we didn't know what was good, bad, or indifferent. We just saw it play out. And so this is how it impacts our current relationship or marriage and what we allow or don't allow in our marriage. And so in this situation, if you are, cheating and burden, as far as I can't stand this, I can't ever have this, a person steps out and even has a conversation with the person, you want to have a divorce or you want to separate. That can be one extreme. The other extreme is accepting this reality and saying, okay, well, I'm not getting my needs met. I don't really want to have the conversation because I'm avoidant of having to fight, but I'm going to step out because that, that works out and that fulfills that situation for me. And so I find that that's part of an interesting concept as well, that we have to look back at that marriage to really see maybe, is there any of these patterns playing out in my current relationship? Another concept that I find is interesting, and you probably as growing up didn't really get it, but maybe mom was frustrated a lot. Or maybe dad didn't seem like he was emotionally there. Maybe it seemed that, mom was really resentful of something. And so we didn't really know what was going on, but really ultimately the concept was that one person or both people were feeling unfulfilled in the relationship. So they weren't being fulfilled. Whatever that was, they weren't getting what they needed. And so they were kind of just going through the day-to-day responses. And, you being the kid, they probably put a lot of weight on you as far as, taking care of you or spending time with you or focusing on you, to not focus on them and to not focus on their issues. And so that can also rub off unconsciously as well, because when you're seeing people kind of go through the motions, That's what happens in a lot of marriages too, where we're not really communicating anymore. We're not having those deep conversations. We're not being able to have that emotional fulfillment, but okay, we're going to grab a bite to eat. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to take the kid here. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But neither one of us are really feeling emotionally fulfilled at all. We're just kind of going through those motions. And we see that a lot with the roommate situation a lot, when both people are feeling unfulfilled, or one person's feeling unfulfilled but is too fearful to have the conversation in fear of fights or arguments, and just don't want that type of antagonism in their life. And the concept of being unfulfilled also kind of merges into the next concept that I want to talk about, and that is disappointment. You know, when we're married, we might be disappointed with the marriage. We could also be disappointed with ourselves, or disappointed with where our life is in general. Maybe it's our career, or the things that we didn't do, or the family we didn't have, or what have you. And so when we're in a marriage, we're dealing with each other's disappointments as well. And sometimes we can be harboring those disappointments, not speaking about it, scared to speak about it, or the disappointments are taking up a lot of the mind share in conversation. And so this could really go hand in hand, because when you were watching this as a child, that disappointment out of your parents came out in different ways, right? Different anger, different feelings, different attitudes. You know, and you saw that. I mean, you didn't know exactly what it was about, but now that you look back at it, you might realize that, okay, my parents were very disappointed about this. Maybe mom was disappointed that she didn't go back to school, or dad was disappointed that he wasn't able to move for a career, or whatever it looks like, or disappointment in the marriage as far as it's not working the way that they thought it was. And so I feel that some of us in our current relationship are harboring disappointment, but either we talk about it and it upsets the other person, or we don't know how to change it, or we're holding it all in because we're scared of having that fight, or scared of having that argument, or scared of hurting someone's feelings. And so these are really interesting patterns and concerns that come into our own relationship and our own marriage, especially when we watched it on the screen right in front of us in Technicolor in our family dynamic. And that's why this is so important. And I'm going to go on and cut up this video into 3 parts, because it's so much information, and I think that this is so important to really think about each piece and take the time to understand that, and be able to look back at your family dynamic and look back at your mom and father and see how that marriage was, and then also begin to see, are there any of those types of situations in my current marriage or current relationship, and to what degree is that? Am I fully aware of what is going on? Is this basically a pattern or some sort of learned response, or is this really integral in my marriage that I need to speak up and have these conversations? If you haven't already, please give us a thumbs up on this video if you liked it and you liked the content. On the comment section, let me know. I mean, when you really think about the fighting and the dishonesty and maybe unfulfillment and disappointment, how does that rank in your marriage? I mean, are you seeing these patterns and feelings in your own marriage? And better yet, do you feel like you're stuck and unable to do anything, or do you feel like you can communicate? Because I find that communication is one of the first breakdowns in a marriage, because we might be scared of how the other person reacts, scared of how they're going to respond, or worried that we're going to hurt their feelings. I also have videos on marriage and marriage in the roommate situation, as well as how to overcome the roommate situation and understand that. In the meantime, don't forget to live your true life.